Hi, I'm Cullen Little. I'm a 12-year-old sports analyst on the Booker Corrigan Show, and I'm here to interview Dean Smith about his new book, Never Easy, Never Pretty.
Thanks, Phil.
In the first chapter of Never Easy, Never Pretty, you claimed that your love affair with football began in 1970 when you were 7 years old, and your father took you to a Colts practice game. What was it that sparked your interest in the game, and in particular the Baltimore Colts?
I think it was meeting Johnny Unitas. I mean, my parents and grandparents had always talked about the 1958 championship and called it the greatest game ever played, but there was not a lot of information about that game. But going to practice and actually meeting Johnny Unitas and carrying his shoulder pads, that kind of made me a fan of Johnny Unitas for life and a fan of the Colts. And it was, just being part of that time in Baltimore, it was an amazing time because, not all of the games were televised, and you had to listen to the radio, so you became familiar with the team, and it was a very close-knit community environment. You'd see these guys around town, and you really felt like they were part of your family.
Yeah, I sort of get the same feeling with the Baltimore Ravens after this run. And so as reading, I noticed that the book has a very interesting structure. While it is a game-by-game analysis of the Ravens' 2012-2013 championship season, it's also a very historical structuring of explaining how the team went from the Colts to the Browns to the Baltimore Ravens, and it's almost a memoir of sorts. How did you conceive of the narrative?
Well, we had the season, so the outline was really based on the season, and I had about 60 days to write the book. So by looking at the games, that became kind of a crude structure for the book.
Why do you think the Ravens engender such enthusiasm? Do you think it is typical of all franchise? And what makes you think that Baltimore fans are special somehow?
It's a great question. Driving back from Chicago a couple of years ago, I heard that, on XM radio, you can hear the other announcers from the other cities talk about when they're in Raven Stadium, and the two guys, I think Bob Trumpy was one of them, the announcers for the Bengals, but they were saying they'd never seen a city where there were so many football jerseys, so many Ravens jerseys. It was just a sea of purple in there. And, I talked to people who've been to Memorial Stadium who haven't yet been to Raven Stadium, and I said, you've got to get in there and hear that sound. Because it was loud at Memorial Stadium on 33rd Street, it wasn't anything like what you hear when that defense takes the field. And I think it goes back to, you listen to a lot of the call-in shows and you hear how people talk about this team. It's almost as if it was their high school team. It was if it was, as if it were part of their family. They refer to the players as the boys, like if they're almost their own children.
Yeah.
So I think it is a special place. It's a small town. It's very tight-knit. Everybody seems to come together around the Ravens. When I first came back here, I'd stop at a gas station, I'd see, people from all walks of life with purple on.
Yeah.
I've never seen anything like that. You live in Chicago, you live in bigger cities, or even if you live in other cities, even in Philly, I don't think it's the same kind of thing.
Yeah, it's very sort of, as you said, tight-knit. Everyone in Baltimore sort of can come together around the Baltimore Ravens because that's something they all have in common. How did you go about writing and researching Never Easy, Never Pretty? Like, did you keep notes from each game in particular? You reworked columns from coverage, obviously. And was it necessary for you to take time after the season ended and reflect on everything that had happened throughout the journey? Or did you just sort of immediately as it ended go about writing and researching?
Well, I had the great benefit of a good researcher named Phil Hearn. So he researched the season for me and grabbed a lot of the coverage. So then I could then marry my thoughts to that coverage. So for the last 3 years, or ever since I moved back in 2010, I've had thoughts about Flacco, thoughts about Cameron, thoughts about the team and the organization. And this season sort of bore out all of those issues in a very interesting way. It was Flacco's contract year. It was Cameron's year to really show, what he could do with a revamped offense. So I wasn't really taking notes. I just went. I wrote the introduction because I felt like that was an important piece of my own history, so sort of really ground my thoughts. And then I wrote the chapter about the Colts, when the Indianapolis Colts came to town, called Blue Horseshoes. And I could see that chapter. I had a poet friend of mine who had written a poem about Johnny Unitas, And I could see that, when he passed away, and I could see that poem going all the way through to the game to the mother of that poet talking about what it was like to watch a Colts game and cook dinner for her family. And but the other chapters aren't like that. That one just came and was very easily conceived. But in Phil's work with the research, he managed to find very interesting tidbits, not just the Sun coverage, but different coverage from the other cities. That's what we wanted to hear. What were the Browns fans thinking when they played the Ravens? What were the how angry were the Houston Texans about that game that they played in 2012? So, it was a sort of a melange of different things that I was trying to put together to give you, the reader, kind of the atmosphere. What was it like in the town? What was the context, the larger context of what this game meant?
As many folks have indicated, an emotional roller coaster. How would you describe watching the team win amid tragedies, the loss of Art Modell in particular, and Torrey Smith's brother dying in a motorcycle crash? This feeling gives your book its title, Never Easy, Never Pretty. Why is this phrase particularly apt for the Ravens?
And that just seemed to be very evident from the beginning that this was what this season was going to be about. When their former owner passed away, Art Modell, and the struggles that he had in Cleveland and in bringing the teams, that wasn't pretty at all. And the first 3 games of the season, you had a 1-point loss, a 1-point victory, but then the next 3 games of the season, which really set the theme. They were there was a game against the Browns that was in the rain that was decided late with a Kerry Williams interception, and the Browns were still knocking on the door as time ran out, throwing the ball into the end zone. And then to Kansas City, which maybe it was the most brutal game of the year, a 9-6 victory, which just was really difficult to watch. And even with the Cowboys game, where I've asked people at the Cowboys game, how close was that field goal to going to being good? So those 3, that second, games 4, 5, and 6 were just right there. They set the tone. They kept people out of the end zone. It was just, it didn't matter as long as what the scoreboard said at the end was that you were ahead. And that seemed to be their they started to feed off that, I think. I don't think they really cared how pretty it was or how it looked. And at the end of the Super Bowl, I think John Harbaugh was on the podium first, and he said, never pretty, never perfect. And then Joe Flacco came up and said, we sure don't make it easy. So those are, or something along those lines. So that's kind of where the title came from.
Awesome. Thank you. Never Easy, Never Pretty. Great book here. I enjoyed reading it. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks a lot.